This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Zach Gorchow. We're recording on Monday, November 25th. Hopefully everyone out there in MichMash land has had a great Thanksgiving. The Friday after Thanksgiving is not just for football. We're happy to bring you another look at important public policy in our state this week, and I'm excited to welcome our guest. Jim Townsend is director of the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy at Wayne State University, started by the late Senator Carl Levin in 2015 after he concluded his half-century of public service, including a Michigan record 36 years in the U.S. Senate, where he was known for dogged oversight and investigations. Jim, welcome to MichMash.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be with you.
Well, we're glad you're here, Jim. And maybe we just start out with the basics here. What is the Levin Center's mission, and where do those efforts stand after nearly a decade of work?
The Levin Center's mission focuses on expanding and elevating bipartisan fact-based oversight, which is really about government accountability and transparency delivered by lawmakers. So most of us think of lawmakers as the people who make the law, and that's true. But in order to do that effectively, they really have to be stewards of the facts. They have to be crucially involved in gathering information on behalf of the public, getting to the heart of important problems that we have, and then either making new law or at least ensuring that the laws we have are working the way they're supposed to be. And we call ourselves the Center for Oversight and Democracy because let's face it, a big problem with people's growing frustration with democracy and, if you believe the polls, people's declining support for democratic institutions is they don't think that our democracy is delivering governance and government services and programs that work for them. People don't feel heard. They don't feel like government's achieving things it's supposed to be achieving. And oversight is supposed to expose those problems, bring them to light, and build consensus on how to solve those problems.
So ideally, Jim, what should legislative bodies, everything from Congress, the legislature, city councils, township boards, school boards, be doing to assure oversight and good government? Because, as you know, Senator Levin used to say, good government requires good oversight.
Well, the key value here is to focus on the way people experience government. What are they getting out of their tax dollars? How are these services, these programs being administered? And is it all really delivering results? And too often what happens, the higher up you go in government, the worse it gets, I would say, is that those people are awfully far from those outcomes. It's often said that the cool kids work on policy, right? They design the strategies and they put together these laws. And that's a long way from the outcomes, the actual experience people have with those government services and policies. So what we advocate for, we do this through workshops and training with lawmakers and other officials that are involved with government oversight, is to say, why don't you prioritize the actual lived experience of the public with government, and then work from there to improve those experiences. And if you focused on that, we'd have a population, the people who are supposed to be served by government would have a lot more faith in it.
Jim, you spent 6 years in the Michigan House of Representatives from 2011 to 16. In the past 25 years since I've been tracking state government, I would not describe the Michigan legislature as a body that really conducts robust oversight of state government as far as conducting investigations and using its subpoena power. I think I could count on one hand the number of times a legislative committee has gone with subpoena power to look into something. But what's your assessment?
My assessment is you would be correct in your assessment.
Okay.
I would go further than that.
Please.
Michigan stands out among many states as having more resources in its legislature, more funds, more staffing, more time. The legislature is for all intents and purposes, a full-time legislature, and there are only a handful of those in the entire country. So if there were going to be a legislature that would be a well-positioned to do good oversight, Michigan would be one. Unfortunately, Michigan, for a variety of reasons which we can get into, does not take the opportunity to do in-depth oversight. It does not take the opportunity to do routine, accountability oversight. What we call, there's kind of two types of oversight. There's the type that's sort of firefighter oversight, when there's a crisis, a disaster, a scandal, and that often will trigger some inquiry by the legislature. That occurs occasionally. But there's another kind. It's called cop on the beat oversight or routine oversight. And that's the kind that you would do on a regular basis, just as a police officer would walk a beat in a community. And that's more about deterring, malfeasance, deterring bad activity, and also keeping tabs so that we know, so there's a good feedback loop back to the people who make policy, again, the legislature, and that we know things are actually working as they should be. So Michigan does not really do either of those kinds of oversight very well. And that's ironic because it actually has more resources than most states to do that job.
So you gave presentations this legislative term, 2023, to both the Michigan House Ethics and Oversight Committee and the Senate Oversight Committee. But in this 2-year legislative term, neither committee has used its subpoena power to investigate the government. And as I looked back through the hearings they've conducted this year, they really haven't done much oversight at all. It's been more focused on, handling bills that have been referred to the committee and maybe pushing those out to the floor. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a disappointing record. You can't sugarcoat this. There's no reason why the legislature could not do more. It's a matter of setting priorities. Sometimes I'll hear from lawmakers or representatives from legislatures, and they'll say, well, this is, we don't have the time. We have limited resources. We don't have that many staff. And that's true. I mean, I think the legislative branch is under-resourced, but it is a matter of where you put your priorities. If your priorities are on being able to draft thousands of bills and push and have them be introduced, that's one thing. It takes a lot of resources to do that. You need skilled staff people. Attorneys have to be involved in drafting that. But you have to consider how many of those bills actually become law, how many of those bills are really needed versus shifting resources toward an oversight effort that would help us better understand what's going on in state government and local government. And, you could take a lot of the folks who work on passing those bills and have them, some of them wouldn't even need new training, but some of them might, and have them focus more on doing oversight. There's a wealth of things that I think citizens would agree are not working the way they should in Michigan, as in any other state. And I think people would really appreciate it if that were to happen.
I mean, you may have answered this a little bit already, but do you think the legislature just needs to rethink how it does oversight? I mean, maybe have these committees just not deal with, routine bills and instead maybe add some additional staff so they have more than just like one staff person to actually have a robust investigative team? Is that part of the missing piece that they just don't have? They're not structured for it.
Zach, you're absolutely right. It's a question of allocating people to do what you want them to do. And if your priorities are, I call it a bill mill, right? Or a lot of, if you want your legislature to be a bill mill where a lot of bills get cranked out and the focus is on how many bills are introduced and passed, then you're going to have most people working on that. But if your focus is on problem solving and outcomes, then you'd probably take more of a focus, put more of your focus on analyzing and gathering data and analyzing the information you have on all of the programs that already exist and all the laws, the thousands of laws that we already have. And you'd be more focused on whether those laws are working. Certainly doesn't mean you don't pass new laws. But I think it's partly and the media plays a role in this. I mean, I think we should be fair. Most of the time when you say, is the legislature doing a good job or is it being successful? The focus is on, well, did it pass all these initiatives? You know, when you measure the effectiveness of a governor or anybody in elective office that's involved with making law, you'll say, well, did they get their agenda enacted? But that's kind of a horse race, version of assessing the effectiveness of our elected officials. What if we put more of the focus on problem solving, on like understanding actually what people who are listening to this or reading, the media, what they actually are concerned about in their daily lives with respect to what the government could do, in helping them. And if we were analyzing the gap between how things are going and how they're doing, we might have a different orientation, and it might be more focused, it'd be focused less on so-and-so's agenda and bills and more on, well, what is the cost of living in Michigan? Can people afford housing? Is there really adequate access to quality, affordable health care or education? All the things that are on people's minds.
You make a very fair point, because I know one of the things we sometimes realize here is, we're so focused on committee approves this bill or House passes this bill, governor signs or vetoes this bill. And too often, there might be some really important legislation that's been enacted 10 years ago, and we don't look as much at implementation, effectiveness, operations, and, being a legislator, as you know, having done it for 6 years, is about much more than just, passing legislation, which is an important part of the job. But there's the constituent service piece, which is very important, and the oversight component, which it does seem like we've been discussing is not really looked at closely, unless, and this sort of gets to where I wanted to go next, unless you have a legislature that's of a different party than the governor. Then all of a sudden there seems to be more interest, maybe not as robust as a permanent subcommittee on investigations like Senator Levin had in Congress, but they will certainly pick their spots. But how do you deal with that? Senator Levin was committed to rigorous oversight, regardless of the party of the president. That seems like a huge hurdle here in Lansing. If the Democratic-led oversight committees were to start subpoenaing members of the Whitmer administration, there would be all kinds of internal heartburn. They haven't done it.
Right.
What's your message to legislators about assuring oversight, even when the governor is a fellow member of their party?
The first thing I'd say, Zach, well, first of all, that's an excellent question. You raised exactly the issue that needs to be addressed. And the first thing I would say is I would point to other states that have one party control but still do effective oversight. One of those states, or one example I would point to, is the state of Oregon, where there is a state senator named Sarah Gelser-Bluen, who has made quite a name for herself doing in-depth oversight into that state's child welfare system, which has been quite troubled. And this was triggered by, I mentioned fire alarm oversight. Well, in their case, they had a child die who was under the supervision of the state, in a foster care setting. And what it revealed, it brought up all kinds of problems, systemic problems in their child welfare system. Senator Bluen worked closely with her Republican, she's a Democrat, worked closely with her Republican counterparts, even though she didn't have to. And Oregon's a very blue state, so you have Democratic control of all branches of government. But she worked across the aisle, and she worked cooperatively with the agencies involved to really dig in, and what that led to was some profound reforms of their child welfare system. She now is somebody who's called upon to go around the country and talk about what she achieved in Oregon. So that's an example of a Democrat doing it to Democrats, but not to those Democrats, but with that Democratic administration to dig into a crucial issue. Another example would be in South Carolina. That is a Republican-controlled state, as you're probably aware. They have a very effective House Oversight Committee that looks at all of state government on a schedule where they identify every 7 years, they try to stay on a schedule of they will look at every department of state government, at least major department of state government, on a cycle. And they put it through a pretty rigorous evaluation. And they involve the public. They invite the public to comment. They involve frontline workers in those agencies. And it's a pretty effective way to keep the government accountable and to keep issues of effectiveness and, the user experience with government kind of at the front of the priority list. So there you have two examples where states of unified party control are doing pretty impactful oversight. So the idea that you can't do oversight in states where you have one party control, I don't think holds up under the facts. The other thing, but the key thing is that you're right. It's likely that a governor, in this say, Democratic governor wouldn't love getting subpoenaed by Democratic lawmakers. Probably doesn't like getting subpoenaed in general. Sometimes, though, subpoenas are necessary because there's an old there's some really great Supreme Court cases I could cite about how oversight is viewed. But the bottom line is when somebody's volunteering you information, a lot of times that information comes with an agenda. Like they volunteer to give you information because it's going to help them in some way. Whereas if you compel somebody to give you information, under the law, then they may or may not be doing it for their own purposes, but because they're under oath and they're subject to penalties of under perjury laws, they're probably going to tell you the truth. So subpoenas have a very important role to play. But really, the crucial thing here is oversight does not have to be this adversarial gotcha kind of exercise where, the person behind the microphone in the hearing room, and I've been that person, up on the dais, asking tough questions. There's a place for that, definitely. But on a day-to-day basis, the work of doing oversight should actually be quite collaborative where the legislative branch is working with the executive branch, not beating up on the executive branch.
You may have answered this a little bit, but we have seen situations with Republicans when they've controlled the legislature, which has been the case for a big chunk of the last 40 years, that they've held Democratic governors or officials, up for oversight investigations on things like COVID or the new terminal at Detroit Metro Airport. These, though, tend to take on a lot of partisan overtones. How can legislators conduct investigations in a fair, nonpartisan way, even if they're looking into a governor or elected official of a different party?
It really has to do with the relationships that they have built across the aisle with their colleagues. So the best oversight investigations are bipartisan oversight investigations. And that's because for two key reasons. One is the credibility of the investigation and whatever it produces, report, hearings, whatever, will be much higher if both parties are involved because it will not appear to the public as a partisan crusade, but instead a real good faith effort to get to the bottom of an important issue. The other thing is that you get a better answer, you get a higher quality investigation if you are listening to people from very different points of view. And that starts with, if you have Democrats and Republicans with a free hand or, with a real hand in the investigation, guiding it, deciding what witnesses to interview and call perhaps to a hearing or what documents you want to analyze. You're doing all that together, you build relationships, and you tend to have a better product because you've had a diversity of views informing the investigation. So you get credibility and quality are much higher if you work across the aisle. And that's what we work on in the Levin Center to help members of Congress. We work in Washington and we work across the country in state legislatures to try to get them to do this.
Jim, we have a large number, I think, of legislators or local government officials and others that might be interested in what the Levin Center can do to help them. If they're interested in training or learning more, what can they do?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, Zach. We have a really terrific website we're very proud of, where a lot of information can be found. It's at Levin-Center or Levin-Center.org. And it has lots of contact information and ways in which you can sign up for our newsletter. You can obviously follow us on social media as well, and keep track of what we're doing. And all of that is sort of a gateway into a lot of information. So it can be videos. We have a whole library of training videos that they can also follow us on social media. And all of this is just a way to kind of get a portal into everything that we do. But we're pretty easy to find, and we're very happy to work with lawmakers here in Michigan and anywhere in the country and even around the world.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Hope you have a great holiday season, and thanks for all the work the Levin Center is doing. It's really interesting to see what it's been up to this past 9+ years.
Zach, thank you. It's been really good talking with you.